We are traveling through the entire history of the United Kingdom, told slowly and warmly, a journey of kingdoms and legends, empires and villages, inventions and songs. Settle into the quiet, let the air around you still, and feel the hush of centuries opening like a book in candlelight. Together, we step gently into a land shaped by rivers and stones, forests and seas, a land whose story is as vast as the tides that wash its shores. Before there was Britain, before there was England, Scotland, Wales, or Ireland, there was only the land itself, a green island rising from the waters, once joined to the continent by a bridge of earth known as Doggerland. Thousands of years ago, when the Ice Age melted and the seas rose, Doggerland was swallowed, and Britain became an island. The first people who crossed its hills lived not in palaces or castles, but in simple huts of wood and clay. Hunters and gatherers who followed herds of deer and ox, who carved tools from flint and bone. Imagine their fires glowing beneath the canopy of ancient oaks, their voices carrying through the still night, their stories etched into memory rather than parchment. Over time, these early peoples raised stones in patterns that still stand. At Stonehenge, on the wide Salisbury Plain, circles of massive stones were lifted upright, aligned with the rising sun of midsummer and the setting sun of midwinter. No one knows precisely why it was built. Perhaps a temple, perhaps a calendar, perhaps a gathering place where the community felt the rhythms of the sky. Yet, to walk among those stones, even now, is to feel the weight of time pressing down, the hush of a people long vanished but never truly forgotten. Burial mounds, barrows, and henges, the countryside, quiet markers of rituals, of belief in an unseen world. The land itself became sacred, and the people lived in communion with its cycles, watching stars, carving symbols, whispering prayers to the earth and sky. By the first millennium before our era, Celtic tribes spread across the island, bringing with them iron tools, intricate jewelry, and a language that sang with rhythm. They built hill forts on high ridges, wooden walls encircling their communities, banners fluttering in the wind. Druids, priests of oak and mistletoe, held knowledge in memory, never writing it down, passing wisdom through spoken word and ritual. They gathered in sacred groves where moonlight filtered through branches and fires burned low, performing rites to honor gods of sky, river, and harvest. Their world was alive with spirits. Each river, each grove, each hill held presence. Life and myth were intertwined, inseparable. Imagine walking into a Celtic settlement. Houses of wattle and daub clustered together, smoke rising from central hearths, children running barefoot in the dust, women weaving cloth, men shaping iron into tools and weapons. At feasts, horns of ale were raised, and bards sang long tales of heroes and ancestors. Stories meant to anchor the tribe in memory. Gold torques gleamed on the necks of chiefs, while warriors painted their bodies with swirling blue designs of woad before battle. The land echoed with drums and chants, the heartbeat of a people who lived as much in myth as in soil. These tribes were not a single nation, but many, each with its own leaders, its own customs. The Iceni of eastern England, the Brigantes of the north, the Silures of Wales, the Picts in Scotland, all distinct, yet bound by similar beliefs and traditions. To the south, the seas brought contact with the wider world. Traders from Gaul and beyond exchanged wine, glass, and fine pottery for Britain's tin and wool. In these exchanges, the island was no longer only remote. It became a node in a wider network, a place of curiosity and value to outsiders. Among the Celts, memory was more powerful than writing. Knowledge was carried by the bards and druids, who could recite endless genealogies, chants, and laws. The natural world was their parchment. Rivers carried meaning. Stones aligned with stars, and seasons gave rhythm to law and festival. Festivals marked the passage of time. Samhain at the end of harvest, when the veil between worlds was thinnest. Beltane in spring, with fires leaping to welcome fertility and renewal. Around the fires, shadows danced, and stories of gods and heroes wove into the night. Picture now the British Isles in those ancient centuries. Green hills rolling under the mist, forests thick and untamed, rivers glittering in dawn light. Across the landscape, hill forts stand silent, their ramparts watching valleys below. Smoke rises from round houses where families huddle by fire. In sacred clearings, druids raise their hands to the moon, chanting softly. Beyond the horizon, change is coming. Sails on the channel, armies from Rome. But for now, the island dreams in its own rhythm. A rhythm older than kings, older than nations, older even than memory itself. From the misty hills of the Celts, the story bends toward the wider world, toward an empire whose reach extended across seas and continents. The Romans, masters of roads and aqueducts, of discipline and law, turned their gaze northward. In 55 and 54 BCE, crossed the Channel with his legions, the first Roman boots pressing into British soil. His expeditions were brief, more a show of strength than a conquest, but they opened a door. The island was no longer only a distant rumor to Rome. It was now a land of interest, of tribute, of potential. Nearly a century later, in 43 CE, Emperor Claudius ordered the full invasion. Imagine the horizon filled with Roman ships, their sails taut with wind. Soldiers in iron helmets, clutching shields and spears, their standards glinting in sunlight. They landed on southern shores, and the conquest began. Town by town, tribe by tribe, the legions pressed inland, building forts as they advanced, carving roads straight as arrows across the countryside. The Celts resisted fiercely, warriors rushing into battle with painted bodies, chariots rattling across fields, bards singing war chants. Yet Rome's discipline, its formations, its relentless engineering overcame. Slowly, the island was bound into the orbit of empire. Still, the land was not easily tamed. In 60 CE, rebellion flared. Boudica, queen of the Iceni, rose in fury after her people were humiliated by Roman officials. With flaming hair and a voice like thunder, she led her warriors into revolt. They burned Roman settlements, destroyed the fledgling town of London, and slaughtered legions unprepared for their rage. For a time, it seemed the island might cast Rome out. But in the end, the legions regrouped, and Boudica's rebellion was crushed. Her memory, however, lingered as a symbol of resistance. A queen who defied empire. A figure who still stands in bronze by the Thames, her chariot wheels poised for battle. Rome's grip grew firmer. Across the land, new towns appeared. Londinium, a bustling port on the Thames. Verulamium, with temples and forums. Bath, with its steaming springs and grand baths, dedicated to the goddess Sulis Minerva. Villas rose in the countryside, mosaics gleaming beneath oil lamps, their patterns of vines and gods shimmering in quiet splendor. Roads stretched from coast to coast, linking forts and markets, carrying merchants, soldiers, and messengers. For the first time, Britain was woven into a vast network of empire, its grain feeding soldiers, its tin and lead enriching trade, its people serving as auxiliaries in Roman legions across the world. At the northern edge, the frontier was marked not only by battles, but by walls. In 122 CE, Emperor Hadrian ordered the building of a great barrier, Hadrian's Wall, a stone and turf line stretching more than 70 miles across the island, from sea to sea. Imagine the soldiers laboring, lifting stone upon stone, the sound of hammers echoing across hills. Behind the wall, forts housed troops from distant lands, Spaniards, Syrians, Africans, men who wrote letters home on thin slivers of wood, their words preserved by the damp earth. They speak to us even now, lists of supplies, invitations to birthday feasts, fragments of human lives on the far edge of empire. Beyond the wall lay tribes Rome never subdued, the ancestors of the Picts, whose painted faces watched from the forests. Roman Britain was not simply conquest, it was transformation. Latin words mingled with Celtic speech, creating layers of language. Roman gods stood beside Celtic ones, their temples sharing space, their rites sometimes blending. Christianity, a quiet faith from the East, began to spread by the 3rd century. Whispered in villas, preached in small communities, carried by merchants and missionaries. In the ruins of later centuries, we find silver chalices, carved crosses, signs that faith had taken root long before the fall of empire. Yet Roman rule was not eternal. By the 4th century, the empire strained under pressure from within and without. Troops were pulled away to defend Italy, Gaul, and the Rhine. Forts grew weaker, roads less maintained, towns more vulnerable. By 410 CE, Rome withdrew its legions, leaving the island to fend for itself. The walls still stood, the villas still shimmered with mosaics, the roads still stretched across hills, but the authority of Rome was gone. Britain slipped into a twilight, no longer Roman, not yet Anglo-Saxon, a land of fading villas and crumbling baths, of Christian communities persisting quietly, of memory and myth interwoven. Picture the island in these final Roman days, Londinium with its half-abandoned forum weeds sprouting between stones, farmers still plowing fields beside fragments of Roman roads, children playing near the ruins of a bathhouse, unaware of the empire that had built it. In the north, Hadrian's wall stands lonely, its garrisons empty, its gates silent. And in the distance, sails appear once more on the horizon. Not Roman this time, but new peoples, new tides of migration, carrying with them languages and traditions that would shape the next chapter of Britain's long story. When the Roman legions withdrew, the island stood exposed, its villas crumbling, its towns fading, its people vulnerable. Into this vacuum came new waves of settlers and invaders. From across the North Sea, Germanic tribes, Angles, Saxons, and Jutes, sailed in long ships, seeking land and opportunity. Their oars cut through mist, their sails swelled with wind. Their warriors stepped onto British shores with iron swords and wooden shields. Slowly, they settled, their language mingling with the remnants of Latin and Celtic, their customs reshaping the land. Over generations, their presence grew until they gave the island its very name, England, the land of the Angles. These newcomers did not inherit Roman stone cities. They built villages of timber, clustered around halls where lords feasted with warriors. Life was harsh but communal. Fields were cleared, cattle herded, crops sown. In the evenings, smoke rose from hearths, and the hall glowed with firelight. Their bards recited poems of ancestors and battles, weaving identity from memory. The poem Beowulf, though written later, reflects this world, a world of meat halls and monsters, of loyalty and fate, of courage in the face of death. It is not just a story, but a mirror of the values of early Anglo-Saxon life. The land was divided into kingdoms, a patchwork known as the Heptarchy. Northumbria in the north, Mercia in the Midlands, Wessex in the south, Kent in the southeast, each with its own kings, laws, and armies. They rivaled one another, fought for supremacy, yet also fostered culture. Northumbria became a beacon of learning, where monks copied manuscripts and painted the Lindisfarne Gospels, pages alive with intricate patterns, vivid colors, and delicate script that glimmered under candlelight. In these monasteries, faith flourished, knowledge was preserved, and the seeds of English literature and art were sown. Christianity spread again across the island. From the west came missionaries from Ireland, fiery and ascetic, crossing seas to preach in wild lands. From the south, came Augustine, sent by Pope Gregory the Great, landing in Kent in 597 to convert King Ethelbert. Together, these missions reshaped the spiritual landscape. Pagan gods of sky and harvest gave way to churches and crosses. Yet even here, the old did not vanish completely. Sacred wells became holy springs. Groves became sites of chapels. Festivals retained echoes of earlier rituals. The blending of pagan and Christian created a faith deeply rooted in the rhythms of the land. Still, the island knew little peace. In the late 8th century, sails appeared again on the horizon. Not of settlers this time, but of raiders. The Vikings had come. In 793, Lindisfarne, the holy island off the northeast coast, was struck. Monks were slaughtered, treasures looted, the abbey burned. The shock reverberated across Christendom. The sea had brought terror. For centuries thereafter, the Vikings returned. Their dragon-prowed ships gliding into rivers, their warriors storming towns, their axes and fire reshaping lives. Monasteries were frequent targets, their treasures seized, their quiet broken. Yet the Vikings were more than raiders. They were traders, settlers, farmers. They carved runes into stone, wove myths of Odin and Thor into their days, and over time they established roots. The Danala, a swath of eastern England, came under their control, where Norse law governed. Norse words mingled with Anglo-Saxon, and villages bore names that still survive today. The clash of cultures became also a mingling, leaving behind language, customs, and place names that endure across England's map. Resistance emerged most fiercely in Wessex under King Alfred, later called the Great. In the 9th century, Alfred fought the Danes with skill and resilience. Though often forced into retreat, he preserved his kingdom, rallied his people, and eventually negotiated peace. He encouraged learning, translated Latin works into English, and founded schools, believing that wisdom was as vital as the sword. Under his reign, the dream of a unified England first glimmered, a vision of one realm out of many. The centuries that followed were a tapestry of struggle and growth. Viking influence remained strong, with kings of Danish descent ruling England at times. Yet the Anglo-Saxon culture persisted, reshaped but unbroken. Monasteries continued to illuminate manuscripts, such as the Book of Kells and the Winchester Bible, works of devotion and artistry that shone like jewels in a dark age. Markets bustled with trade in wool, metalwork, and salt. Villages thrived along rivers, and the English language itself deepened, enriched by both Saxon and Norse tongues. In the far north, beyond the reach of Anglo-Saxon lords, the land of Scotland was forming its own identity, forged from the Picts and the Gaels. Their stones bore carvings of warriors and beasts. Their kings gathered power in the shadow of mountains. In Wales, old Celtic traditions remained strong. Their poets and bards preserving tales of Arthur and other heroes, blending myth with memory. Ireland has shone with monastic scholarship. Its illuminated manuscripts among the finest of all Europe, its missionaries carrying learning far beyond its shores. The isles were diverse, each region holding its own soul, yet all woven together by the restless seas that surrounded them. Picture the British Isles in these centuries, Meadows glowing with fire as warriors feast monks meant over manuscripts while the sea crashes. Against cliffs Viking ships sliding silently up rivers at dawn, bells tolling from wooden churches in villages of thatch and timber. It was an age of uncertainty, of raids and rivalries, but also an age of resilience and creation. Out of these centuries, the roots of kingdoms were planted, roots that would one day grow into the nations we know today. The year was 1066, and the winds of destiny carried sails across the Channel. William, Duke of Normandy, claimed the throne of England, and with him came an army of knights, archers, and ambition. At Hastings, in October, battle raged upon a hill. The Anglo-Saxons, led by Harold Godwinson, stood in a shield wall, their axes gleaming, their voices raised in defiance. The Normans charged, retreated, feigned flight, and charged again. Hours passed, the sun lowering, the clash relentless. In the chaos, Harold fell, an arrow piercing his eye, so the chronicles say, and with him, Anglo-Saxon rule ended. William was crowned King of England, and the Norman conquest began. The land changed swiftly under Normans' hands. Castles of stone rose where once wooden fortresses stood, towers of power looming above towns and rivers, symbols of a new order. The Doomsday Book, compiled in 1086, surveyed every village, every field, every flock. It was a ledger of control, recording who owned what, how much tax could be drawn, a mirror of a society reshaped by conquest. Feudalism spread. Kings granted lands to lords. Lords to knights. Peasants bound to soil, each owing service upward in a chain of loyalty. The rhythms of life shifted, the hierarchy steepened, the weight of authority pressed heavier upon the common people. The Normans brought not only stone and law, but a new language. French words mingled with Old English, creating the beginnings of the English we know today. Court spoke French, peasants spoke English, monks prayed in Latin. Over centuries, these tongues fused, weaving a rich tapestry of vocabulary, where kingly terms and common speech met and merged. The language became as layered as the society itself, holding echoes of conquest in every word. The Middle Ages unfolded in centuries of both grandeur and hardship. Cathedrals soared, their spires pointing heavenward, their stained glass shimmering like jewels. In Canterbury, York, Lincoln, Salisbury, stone rose with a grace that seemed impossible, arches lifting weight as if defying gravity. Within, choirs sang in Latin, their voices echoing in vaults of light. Monks in cloisters copied manuscripts, preserving knowledge, illuminating pages with gold and color, each letter a prayer. Pilgrims walked long roads to shrines, their staffs tapping, their lips murmuring prayers to saints. Faith was the heartbeat of daily life, woven into festivals, laws, and the turning of seasons. Yet life, for most, was bound to soil. Villages clustered around manors. Peasants toiled in fields from dawn until dusk, plowing with oxen, reaping with sickles, sowing grain that sustained all. Taxes were paid in labor and harvest. Obligations heavy but enduring. In winter, fires burned low. Families huddled in huts of thatch and wattle, telling stories to chase away the cold. Though burdened, their lives held rhythms of feast and fast, holy days and fairs, moments when music and dance lit the long cycle of toil. Their resilience carried the kingdom through famine, plague, and war. The 13th century brought voices for liberty. In 1215, under the weight of Barons' rebellion, King John sealed the Magna Carta at Runnymede, though at first a document of baronial rights. It carried within it the seed of a greater idea, that even kings were bound by law, that freedom and justice could be written into parchment and sealed with wax. Over centuries, that idea would echo louder, shaping parliaments, revolutions, and the very fabric of democracy. But not all was order. The 14th century brought calamity. In 1348, the Black Death arrived, carried by ships, spread by fleas and breath. Villages emptied, fields lay fallow, carts carried the dead through silent streets. A third of the population perished. The bells of churches tolled endlessly. Prayers rose, but answers did not come. And yet, from devastation came change. Labor grew scarce. Peasants demanded wages. Serfdom began to weaken. The old order cracked, and voices of the common people rose louder. In 1381, the peasants' revolt shook the land. Farmers, laborers, townsfolk marched to London, demanding an end to serfdom, fair rents, and freedom. They surged into the city, their leaders, Wat Tyler and John Ball, preaching equality, that all were made in God's image. For a moment, it seemed the world might turn upside down. Though the revolt was crushed, the memory endured. The idea that the many could challenge the few whispered across generations. Amid turmoil, culture bloomed. Geoffrey Chaucer wrote the Canterbury Tales, stories of pilgrims told in English, alive with wit and humanity. For the first time, English, not Latin or French, carried literature of depth and breadth, giving voice to common speech as art. Universities rose in Oxford and Cambridge, halls of study where scholars debated theology, philosophy, medicine, and law, their quills scratching by candlelight. Knowledge deepened, curiosity widened, the seeds of Renaissance stirring before their time. The Middle Ages were also years of war. The 100 Years' War with France dragged on. Battles across fields and castles, archers with longbows changing the face of combat. In 1415, at Agincourt, English arrows fell like rain. cutting down knights in armor. A victory that echoed in song and story. Yet, the war drained coffers, burdened peasants, and left scars on both sides of the Channel. At home, dynastic strife erupted. The Wars of the Roses, Lancaster and York, locked in bitter struggle. Their red and white roses, symbols of blood and claim. Castles were besieged, nobles betrayed, kings unseated. The crown itself seemed fragile, shifting from head to head like a restless spirit. Through it all, the people endured. They prayed in churches, tilled their fields, told stories by firelight. The cathedrals still rose, bells still rang, markets still bustled. And as the 15th century waned, out of the ashes of civil war, a new dynasty rose. The Tudors, who would lead England into an age of reformation, discovery, and drama unlike any before. Picture the Middle Ages now. Castles silhouetted against twilight, banners fluttering above walls. Villages of thatch nestled by rivers, smoke rising into the evening air. Monks bending over manuscripts as candle wax drips. Pilgrims on dusty roads, their songs carried by wind. The tolling of bells across a countryside, both weary and eternal. It is an age both harsh and magnificent, bound in faith and fear, yet alive with the quiet persistence of a people who built, endured, and dreamed. The Wars of the Roses left England weary, its nobility thinned, its throne uncertain. Out of this turmoil rose a new line, the Tudors, beginning with Henry VII, who united Lancaster and York through marriage, binding red and white roses into the Tudor rose. His reign brought stability after decades of bloodshed, his careful rule laying a foundation of order. Yet it was his son, Henry VIII, who would burn his name into history, a king of grandeur, passion, and upheaval. Henry VIII strode across his age with vigor, a monarch of towering appetite and ambition. In his youth, he was handsome, athletic, a patron of music and learning. But his reign would be remembered for transformation. Desiring an heir and frustrated by papal refusal to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon, Henry broke from Rome. The English Reformation began not in dusty debates, but in the personal will of a king. With Parliament's support, he declared himself supreme head of the Church of England, dissolving monasteries, seizing their wealth, and reshaping the spiritual life of the realm. Monks were cast out, abbeys stripped of treasures, libraries scattered. Yet in their place, a new authority of crown and church intertwined, giving England a distinct religious identity. Henry married 6 times, his wives remembered in rhyme. Divorced, beheaded, died. Divorced, beheaded, survived. His court glittered with intrigue, music, feasts, and shadow. Beneath the banquets and pageantry lurked fear, for his wrath was swift, his justice absolute. Yet his legacy was more than personal scandal. He left behind a realm stronger in sovereignty, a monarchy more commanding than ever before. After him came his children, each shaping the realm in turn. Edward VI, frail and young, continued Protestant reforms. Mary, daughter of Catherine, sought to restore Catholic faith, her reign marked by burnings that gave her the grim name Bloody Mary. And then came Elizabeth, the Virgin Queen, whose reign would become one of the brightest in England's memory. She navigated plots and pressures with caution and brilliance, balancing factions, avoiding entangling marriages, and presenting herself as wedded to her realm. Her court sparkled with poets and explorers. William Shakespeare staged plays at the Globe Theatre, his words weaving tragedies and comedies alive with human depth. Christopher Marlowe penned dramas of ambition and fate. Music, poetry, and painting flourished, creating what is remembered as the Elizabethan Golden Age. Beyond the stage, ships sailed further than ever. Francis Drake circumnavigated the globe, his ships returning laden with treasures. Walter Raleigh dreamed of colonies across the ocean, planting seeds of empire. The seas carried both wealth and war, for Spain, the great Catholic power, viewed Protestant England as an enemy. In 1588, the Spanish Armada set sail, vast, formidable, confident of conquest. Yet storms scattered their ships, and English fireships broke their ranks. The Armada was defeated, and England's independence, its Protestant identity, was secured. The victory rang like a bell across Europe, and Elizabeth's reign seemed blessed with destiny. Daily life in Tudor England was vivid and varied. In cities, markets bustled with traders, apprentices, and beggars. Inns echoed with laughter, gossip, and ale. Theaters drew crowds of nobles and commoners alike, groundlings pressing close to the stage, courtiers watching from galleries. In villages, peasants worked fields of wheat and barley, brewed ale, and kept chickens and pigs. Feasts marked the calendar with dances, songs, and games. Belief in magic lingered, charms and potions used to heal or to harm. The world was a blend of faith and superstition, scripture and folklore side by side. Fashion reflected the grandeur of the age. Ruffs, stiff around necks, gowns heavy with embroidery, men in doublets and hose. Colors bright, fabrics rich. Clothing itself became a statement of rank and power. Even food was a pageant. Roasted meats, spiced pies, sweetmeat, gilded in sugar, while the poor lived on bread, pottage, and ale. The contrasts of wealth and poverty, of glittering court and muddy village, defined Tudor society. Yet all shared in the drama of a nation reshaping itself. Elizabeth's reign ended without heir, and with her, the Tudor line closed. Yet she left behind a kingdom stronger, more confident, its culture radiant, its ships pushing outward, its people bound by a sense of destiny. From the turmoil of Henry to the triumph of Elizabeth, the Tudor century was one of upheaval and glory. Picture Tudor England now, the Globe Theatre alive with the murmur of a crowd, the words of Shakespeare floating into twilight. the Thames, busy with ships' sails catching wind. Country fields, golden with harvest peasants singing as they reap. The court, glittering with silks and jewels. Music, echoing in vaulted halls. It is an age both turbulent and luminous, remembered not for peace, but for transformation, for art, and for the voice of a queen whose presence still lingers in memory. When Elizabeth I passed in 1603 without heir, the crown passed to her cousin, James VI of Scotland, who became James I of England. For the first time, the crowns of England and Scotland were joined in one head, though not yet in one parliament. A king of learning, James believed in divine right, that monarchs ruled by God's will. He commissioned the King James Bible, a translation whose cadences would shape English speech and poetry for centuries. Yet beneath his scholarship lay tension. Catholics hoped for toleration. Puritans pushed for further reform. Parliament pressed for influence. The realm entered a new century with questions unresolved. In 1605, conspiracy flared. A group of Catholics, angered by repression, plotted to blow up the Houses of Parliament and kill the king. Among them was Guy Fawkes, discovered guarding barrels of gunpowder beneath Westminster. The gunpowder plot failed, and November 5th became marked with bonfires and fireworks. A ritual of memory that still glows in the night sky. But the plot also deepened mistrust, sharpening lines between faiths, leaving scars that endured for generations. The tensions between Crown and Parliament swelled under James's son. Charles I, he ruled with stubborn belief in royal authority, levying taxes without consent, dismissing parliaments, surrounding himself with courtiers who seemed distant from the people. His reforms to the church angered Puritans who saw in them echoes of Catholicism. Discontent spread like smoke. By the 1640s, the strain snapped and the land plunged into civil war. The English Civil War tore families, towns, and loyalties apart. Royalists, cavaliers with flowing hair and plumed hats, fought for a king and tradition. Parliamentarians, Roundheads in plain dress, fought for rights of governance and conscience. Fields that once held harvests became battlefields, where muskets cracked, cannon roared, and horsemen clashed in thunder. At Naseby, Marston, Moor, Edgehill, battles were fought with fury. The fate of a kingdom hanging in smoke. In 1649, the war reached its climax. Charles I, captured, tried, and condemned, walked to the scaffold before Whitehall. The axe fell, and with it, the monarchy itself. A king executed by his own people. A moment that shocked Europe, a shudder through centuries of tradition. In the years that followed, England became a republic, the Commonwealth, led by Oliver Cromwell. A Puritan soldier of stern conviction, Cromwell governed with discipline, abolishing monarchy and House of Lords, waging war in Ireland and Scotland, enforcing strict morality at home. Taverns quieted, theaters closed, Sundays observed with solemn rigor. Yet, even as he held power, unease lingered. When he died in 1658, the Republic faltered, its strength resting more on his will than on structures. Within 2 years, monarchy returned. The Restoration of 1660 brought Charles II, son of the executed king, back to the throne. London rejoiced. Bells rang, bonfires blazed. Theaters reopened. Laughter and music filled the air. Fashion brightened once more. Charles, witty and charming, filled his court with poets, scientists, and mistresses. Yet his reign was not without trial. In 1665, plague returned, carrying off thousands. A year later, the Great Fire of London roared through the city, flames consuming churches, homes, and markets. Out of ashes rose renewal. Sir Christopher Wren's designs lifting St. Paul's Cathedral into the sky, a dome that still watches the city centuries later. The Restoration was also an age of curiosity and discovery. The Royal Society was founded, where men like Isaac Newton, Robert Boyle, and Christopher Wren explored the mysteries of nature with experiments and telescopes. The world seemed open for investigation, knowledge no longer bound to tradition, but sought in reason and proof. Coffeehouses buzzed with debate, pamphlets circulated ideas, and London grew into a city of trade and thought, its docks filled with goods from across the seas. Yet politics remained restless. Religious strife smoldered, succession questioned, and in 1688 another revolution came, this one bloodless. James II, Catholic and authoritarian, was deposed in what became known as the Glorious Revolution. William of Orange and Mary, his Protestant wife, were invited to rule, and with them came a new balance. Parliament asserted supremacy. The Bill of Rights declared limits on royal power, and constitutional monarchy began to take shape. The crown endured, but its authority was now bound by law. Out of decades of conflict, a new order emerged. Monarchy and parliament together, shaping governance not by divine decree, but by compromise and charter. Picture Stuart Britain, Guy Fawkes' effigy crackling on November bonfires, muskets flashing on misty fields, a king walking to the scaffold. Cromwell's stern face framed by shadows, and then the jubilant bells of restoration, the laughter of reopened theaters. It was an age of turmoil and transformation, where authority was questioned, faith contested, and governance reshaped. The kingdom survived, but it was never the same. A land now learning to balance crown and people, tradition and change, war and renewal. The dawn of the 18th century opened with a union. In 1707, the kingdoms of England and Scotland were bound together by the Act of Union, creating the Kingdom of Great Britain. Two parliaments became one. Two crowns, long linked by blood and politics, now merged in law. The union brought tension as well as opportunity. Scotland, with its proud traditions and history of independence, entered reluctantly. Yet, the new arrangement offered trade, stability, and shared destiny. Across the sea, Ireland remained a kingdom under the same monarch, yet its people were bound in unequal measure. its Catholics restricted by penal laws, its economy constrained. The United Kingdom was still centuries away, but the threads of one realm were being woven. The new century also brought a new dynasty. In 1714, with the death of Queen Anne, the throne passed to the Hanoverians, German princes linked by Protestant succession. George, I spoke little English, his court half foreign in manner, but his reign marked the shift of power. Parliament, not monarch, grew stronger. With Sir Robert Walpole often remembered as the first, the age of absolute monarchs faded. The balance tilted toward constitutional rule. This was also an age of ideas, the Enlightenment, when reason, science, and curiosity flourished. In Edinburgh, the Scottish Enlightenment sparkled with thinkers like David Hume, who questioned human nature and knowledge, and Adam Smith, whose wealth of nations laid foundations of economics. In London, coffee houses became the penny universities, where men of all ranks debated politics, philosophy, and news over steaming cups. Newspapers multiplied, pamphlets fluttered through streets. Satire sharpened in the pens of writers like Jonathan Swift and Alexander Pope. Knowledge no longer flowed only through Latin in cloisters, but in English on printed pages, accessible to merchants, artisans, and farmers. Architecture reflected this order and elegance. Georgian cities rose with symmetry and grace, Bath with its crescents of honey-colored stone, Edinburgh's new town with neoclassical dignity, London's squares lined with terraces, Palladian style with columns and domes, adorned country houses and town halls. Even as soot from industry began to darken air, the ideals of balance and proportion shaped streets and skylines. Yet, beneath refinement lay turbulence. The Jacobite risings in Scotland sought to restore the Stuarts, especially the 1745 rebellion led by Bonnie Prince Charlie. Highland clans rallied, marching south with pipes and banners, their hopes burning. For a time, victory seemed possible, but at Culloden in 1746, the dream ended in slaughter. The last pitched battle on British soil. The aftermath brought harsh suppression, the breaking of clan structures, the banning of tartans and bagpipes, and a reshaping of Highland life. The romance of the Jacobites lingered in songs and legends, but their power was gone. The 18th century was also a century of empire. Ships sailed from Bristol, Liverpool, and London, carrying goods and people across oceans. The triangular trade brought wealth, but also the horrors of slavery. Africans taken by force, transported in chains, sold in colonies. Sugar, tobacco, and cotton returned, enriching merchants while binding lives in suffering. Voices against slavery grew, from Quakers to William Wilberforce, but abolition was yet to come. Meanwhile, colonies in America flourished, until in 1776 they declared independence, and Britain, once triumphant, tasted defeat. The empire endured, shifting focus to India, the Caribbean, and beyond. But the loss of America marked a turning point. Science and exploration carried equal weight with politics. Isaac Newton's laws of motion and gravity reshaped understanding of the universe. Astronomers charted the heavens, botanists catalogued plants from across the globe, explorers mapped coastlines and seas. The Royal Society nurtured experiment and discovery, fostering a culture where questions became engines of progress. Even in households, curiosity stirred. Cabinets of curiosities filled with shells, fossils, coins, and artifacts. Small worlds of wonder gathered under glass. Daily life was marked by contrasts. For the wealthy, balls and assemblies filled nights with music and dancing. Carriages rattled along cobbled streets. Silk and lace adorned figures in candlelit halls. For the poor, work in fields and workshops continued, often harsh, sometimes brutal. Children labored in mines or as apprentices. The workhouse loomed for those in destitution. Yet, alongside hardship, traditions of song, fair, and festival persisted. People gathered at markets, told tales by firelight, and celebrated holy days with ale and laughter. The 18th century also carried political reform. In 1689, the Bill of Rights had limited monarchs, but over the Georgian era, Parliament grew in authority. The notion of accountability widened, slowly, imperfectly, but firmly. Corruption remained, seats bought and sold, but debates of liberty, rights, and representation gained strength. Echoing from America's Revolution to France's, the people of Britain watched with curiosity and anxiety, their own path winding between tradition and change. Picture Georgian Britain, Bathurst crescents gleaming in sunlight, Edinburgh's philosophers debating in lamplit taverns, London's coffee houses alive with pamphlets and argument, Highland glens echoing with pipes before Killoden, Liverpool's docks crowded with ships, sugar and rum unloaded, and in parlors families reading the latest poems of Pope or novels of Samuel Richardson. It was an age of elegance and contradiction, of refinement and exploitation, of ideas that would shape revolutions and reforms yet to come. As the century closed, the world shifted again. Steam engines hissed, factories rose, railways gleamed on horizons. The Industrial Revolution had begun, and Britain would soon be transformed into the workshop of the world. Its smoke and steel reshaping not only its own landscape, but that of the entire globe. The dawn of the 19th century found Britain standing at a threshold of transformation. The rhythms of fields and villages, of plows drawn by oxen and mills turned by water, gave way to the hiss of steam and the clang of iron. The Industrial Revolution, born in workshops and coal mines, remade not only Britain but the world. In smoky cities, factories rose with tall chimneys, their furnaces glowing day and night. Workers poured through their gates at dawn, men, women, and even children laboring long hours among looms, pistons, and gears. The air filled with soot, the streets with noise, the sky with haze, a new landscape of power and hardship, invention and inequality. Coal from northern mines fed engines that pulled trains across railways, iron rails glinting under sun and rain. The locomotive became a symbol of the age, smoke billowing, wheels pounding, speed unimaginable before. Villages, once remote, found themselves connected. Cities swelled as migrants left countryside for work in factories. Cotton from colonies spun into cloth in Manchester's mills. Steel poured from furnaces in Sheffield. Ships launched from Clyde and Mersey. Britain became known as the workshop of the world, its goods carried on oceans to distant markets. Yet the transformation was not only in machines. The age was also one of empire's vast expansion. From India to Africa, from Canada to Australia, Britain's flag was raised. Colonies supplied raw materials and markets, but also demanded administration and soldiers. The empire became both pride and burden, celebrated in exhibitions and maps shaded red, but carried on the backs of countless subjects whose voices were often silenced. In 1851, the Great Exhibition in London displayed this triumph. The Crystal Palace of glass and iron filled with machines, fabrics, jewels, and curiosities from across the globe. Visitors walked beneath its glittering roof in awe, believing they stood at the very heart of progress. The Victorian Age, named for Queen Victoria, who reigned from 1837 to 1901, carried these contradictions. Victoria, with Prince Albert by her side, embodied family values, morality, and empire. Her face became known across coins and portraits, her jubilees celebrated with processions and bells. Yet, beneath the surface, society wrestled with poverty, class divides, and questions of faith. Dickens wrote of orphaned children, of debtors' prisons, of foggy streets where hunger and cruelty walked. His novels, Oliver Twist, Bleak House, Great Expectations, opened eyes to the struggles of the poor. Meanwhile, new thinkers challenged old beliefs. Charles Darwin, with his theory of evolution, stirred debate about creation and faith. John Stuart Mill argued for liberty, rights, and equality. Daily life carried the mark of change. In cities, gas lamps lit streets at night. Newspapers spread news rapidly, and penny dreadfuls entertained readers with sensational tales. Railways allowed seaside holidays for the working class. Families traveling to Brighton or Blackpool to taste sea air and watch waves. In parlors, families gathered around pianos, singing hymns and ballads. Tea, imported from India and China, became a ritual of comfort, served in porcelain cups, sweetened with sugar from Caribbean plantations. At the same time, reform movements gained strength. Campaigns for abolition of slavery, for improved working conditions, for women's rights. Factories brought hardship, but also solidarity. Strikes and unions formed, voices calling for justice. The face of the nation itself changed. London grew immense, its streets crowded, its Thames lined with ships. Slums housed the poor in squalor. Yet, Grand avenues displayed wealth. Scotland's cities, Glasgow, Edinburgh, became centers of industry and intellect. In Ireland, tragedy struck with the Great Famine of the 1840s, when potato blight destroyed crops. Millions starved, and millions more emigrated, crossing seas to America or Britain itself, leaving behind fields of silence and sorrow. The famine scarred Ireland deeply, a wound still felt in memory and history. Education expanded, literacy rose, and new technologies reshaped communication. The telegraph carried messages across wires at lightning speed. The photograph captured faces in silver and light. The first telephone crackled with voices. Medicine, anesthesia eased surgery. Antiseptics reduced death. Hospitals grew more scientific. Yet, superstition lingered too, with spiritualism popular in drawing rooms, as Victorians sought comfort in a world of rapid change. The empire was not merely conquest, but encounter. Indian soldiers marched under British banners. African artifacts filled museums. Explorers like David Livingstone traveled rivers unknown to Europeans, writing of peoples and lands. Missionaries carried Bibles, traders carried goods, armies carried rifles. Pride in empire grew, celebrated in poetry and pageant, yet so too did resistance among those ruled. The seeds of independence were already being planted. Victorian architecture reshaped skylines, Gothic revival churches with pointed spires, railway stations like cathedrals of iron and glass, bridges spanning rivers with grace and might. In countryside, factories loomed beside cottages, railways cut through fields, canals carried barges of coal. The hum of industry blended with the toll of church bells, the clatter of carts, the cries of market stalls. Picture Britain in the Victorian age, trains steaming through valleys, children reading by gaslight factories, roaring with machines, slums echoing with cries, drawing rooms alive with poetry, and song Queen Victoria's image hanging above mantels, the Crystal Palace glowing with a promise of progress. It was an age of contrast, wealth and poverty, invention, empire and resistance, faith and doubt. Out of its contradictions came modern Britain, forged in smoke and steel, tempered in reform and imagination. The 20th century dawned with empire at its height. Britain ruled over vast territories, its navy the largest in the world, its industries humming. Yet, beneath pride, tensions brewed. Struggles for suffrage grew louder, women demanding the right to vote, marching in streets, chaining themselves to railings, enduring prison, and force-feeding for their cause. Strikes spread among workers, demanding fair wages and conditions. Ireland, restless under centuries of control, pressed for home rule. The empire looked strong, but within and without, pressures mounted. In 1914, the guns of Europe shattered peace. The assassination of an archduke in faraway Sarajevo pulled Britain into the First World War. Soldiers marched through cheering crowds, believing they would be home by Christmas. Instead, they sank into trenches across France, mud and barbed wire defining their lives. Shells thundered, machine guns cut down waves of men, gas choked lungs. The war consumed millions. The fields of Ypres, the Somme, and Passchendaele soaked in blood. Letters home spoke of longing, fear, and endurance. Poets like Wilfred Owen and Siegfried Sassoon captured the horror in lines that still sting. The old lie, doci et decorum est pro patria mori. At home, women entered factories, driving buses, working fields, filling roles left by men at war. Their contribution changed perceptions, strengthening the call for suffrage. In 1918, as the war ended, some women gained the vote. And by 1928, suffrage was equal for men and women alike. Yet the war left scars, cemeteries of white crosses across Europe. A lost generation of young men, grief in every town and village. The empire had fought, but its confidence was shaken. The interwar years carried both glamour and hardship. Jazz played in clubs, radios filled homes with music, cinemas flickered with silver screens. Yet unemployment soared in industrial towns. Strikes shook the nation, and in Ireland, conflict deepened. The Easter Rising of 1916 had lit a fire, and by 1921, Ireland was partitioned. The Irish Free State born, while Northern Ireland remained within the UK. The map itself was reshaped, the Union altered. Then, in 1939, war came again. Nazi Germany's rise pulled the world into darkness. Britain declared war after the invasion of Poland, and soon bombs fell on its own cities. The Blitz turned night into fire. Londoners sheltering in underground stations as bombs whistled overhead. Coventry's cathedral reduced to ruins, Liverpool's docks in flames. Yet the people endured, their resilience captured in the steady voice of Winston Churchill. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall never surrender. The war reached across the globe, from deserts of North Africa to seas of the Atlantic, from skies over Britain to jungles of Burma. In 1940, the Battle of Britain was fought in the air. Spitfires and Hurricanes dueling Messerschmitts. Radar guiding defenses, young pilots hailed as the few. In 1944, Allied forces landed in Normandy, British troops among them, pushing to liberate Europe. Victory came in 1945, but at terrible cost. Cities lay in rubble, families mourned, millions lost, rationing continued for years. Yet the war also reshaped the future. The welfare state was born. The National Health Service, founded in 1948, offering care to all. Hope rose from ruin. The empire, though, was ending. Colonies demanded independence. India won freedom in 1947, followed by nations across Asia, Africa, and the Caribbean. The red shading on maps faded, and Britain turned inward, adjusting to a new role. Immigration brought new voices, new cultures from the Caribbean, South Asia, and Africa, enriching cities with diversity, reshaping identity. Britain became not only an island of ancient traditions, but a mosaic of many peoples. Rationing slowly lifted, yet housing was scarce, rebuilding slow. But in culture, a revolution stirred. Skiffle gave way to rock, and soon the world danced to British music. The Beatles from Liverpool, the Rolling Stones, and countless others filled airwaves, their sound the anthem of a generation. London swung with fashion, Carnaby Street alive with color, miniskirts and mod style. Films, art, and literature flourished. It was an age of youth, of rebellion, of questioning authority. Yet the old struggles lingered. Strikes continued, miners and dockers demanding rights. Northern Ireland sank into violence, the Troubles erupting in the late 1960s. Bombings, shootings, soldiers patrolling streets, communities divided by walls. For decades, conflict scarred Belfast and Derry, until peace was slowly, painfully built at century's end. The 1970s and 1980s brought economic hardship and political strife. Industries declined, unemployment rose, and discontent spread. Margaret Thatcher, Prime Minister from 1979, reshaped politics with privatization, union confrontations, and a fierce defense of market principles. Her era was divisive, celebrated by some, hated by others. Strikes, riots, and protests marked her years, yet she also stood firm in crises. From the Falklands War to the Cold War, Britain's global role had changed, but its voice remained strong. Through it all, daily life shifted. Television became a fixture, families gathering around sets to watch news, comedies, dramas. Cars filled roads, supermarkets replaced corner shops. Technology entered homes. The voice of Britain grew not only in parliaments and wars, but in the everyday rhythms of work, leisure, and family. Picture the 20th century now. Soldiers trudging through mud, at the some women welding in factories during the Blitz. Churchill's voice echoing on radios, Beatles fans screaming in stadiums, miners' picket lines stretching across cold roads, neon lights flickering above London streets. Grief and creativity, empires end and new beginnings. Out of its storms, the United Kingdom entered the world we know today. Scarred, yet unbroken, heavy with memory, yet alive with renewal. As the 20th century waned, the United Kingdom carried the weight of its past and the uncertainty of its future. The empire had faded, but the nation still held influence as a financial, cultural, and political power. The late decades were marked by transformation, as old industries declined and new economies emerged. As politics shifted and as society grew more diverse and dynamic. In 1997, the Labour government under Tony Blair ushered in what was called a new era of optimism, a cool Britannia of music, art, and confidence. That same year, the United Kingdom embraced devolution. Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland gained their own assemblies or parliaments, each reclaiming a measure of self-governance. The old unitary state loosened, threads rewoven into a patchwork that recognized different voices within the Union. Northern Ireland, after decades of conflict, saw the Good Friday Agreement, a peace accord that brought fragile but enduring hope. Walls began to come down, and while tensions lingered, the sound of guns fell quiet. Society itself transformed. Immigration from former colonies, begun after the Second World War, reshaped cities into mosaics of cultures. London, Birmingham, Manchester, Glasgow. These became global, vibrant, diverse. Curry houses, Caribbean carnivals, African markets, and Asian festivals blended into the life of Britain. The nation was no longer only Anglo-Saxon or Celtic, but a living blend of histories, traditions, and languages. With this richness came new challenges, debates about identity, belonging, and the meaning of Britishness. Yet the streets echoed with voices of many worlds, a reflection of centuries of empire and trade now returned home. Technology reshaped daily life. The internet entered homes, mobile phones filled pockets, and Britain became as wired as the rest of the globe. Supermarkets expanded, airports hummed, trains modernized. Television, once a few channels, exploded into hundreds, then into streaming. Global entertainment crossing borders instantly. The everyday pace accelerated, but so too did connection. Families could speak across oceans. Students could access libraries of the world with a click. The United Kingdom was no longer an island in thought, even as it remained one in geography. Politically, the early 21st century brought both unity and division. Britain stood with allies in wars abroad, in Afghanistan and Iraq, decisions that sparked protest and controversy. Domestically, economic crises tested governments, recessions straining households. Yet, the most profound question came with Europe. Membership in the European Union, long debated, came to a vote. In 2016, a referendum declared Britain would leave Brexit. The decision split families, regions, and generations, igniting debates about sovereignty, identity, and future. In 2020, the departure became real, and Britain walked a new path, no longer bound to the EU, uncertain yet determined. Culturally, Britain remained a beacon. Its literature, from J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter to Hilary Mantel's historical novels, captivated readers worldwide. Its music, from Oasis and Coldplay to grime and electronic beats, carried British sound into global charts. Its television and films, from Doctor Who to The Crown, shaped imagination across continents. The BBC, long a voice of authority, continued to broadcast to the world. Sport to carried its flag. The Premier League, watched on screens across the globe, made football both local passion and international spectacle. The London Olympics of 2012 shown as a moment of unity and celebration. A modern display of Britain's creativity and pride. In Scotland, independence debates grew louder. In 2014, a referendum narrowly kept Scotland in the Union, but questions lingered. Sharpened by Brexit, as Scotland voted overwhelmingly to remain in the EU, Wales asserted its voice through its Senate. And Northern Ireland continued to balance peace and politics, its position between Britain and Ireland delicate. The United Kingdom of the 21st century was less a single state than a partnership under constant negotiation, held together by tradition, law, and compromise. The monarchy, too, shifted. Queen Elizabeth II, who had reigned since 1952, became a symbol of continuity through decades of change. Her presence, steady and dignified, spanned from the post-war years into the digital age. In 2022, her Platinum Jubilee marked 70 years on the throne, celebrated with parades, beacons, and pageantry. That same year, her death closed an era. Crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace, flowers piled high, tears shed. Her son, Charles III, ascended, carrying the crown into a new century. The monarchy, once absolute, now ceremonial, remained a thread of identity, its rituals binding past to present. Picture the United Kingdom today. London's skyline of glass towers beside the Gothic spires of Westminster. Edinburgh's castle, silhouetted above cobbled streets. Cardiff, alive with music and rugby. Murals speaking of memory and resilience. Villages of stone cottages in hedgerows still mark the countryside, while high-speed trains link cities and airplanes carry millions abroad. The accents shift from county to county, the humor sharp, the resilience quiet. Within its shores, live traditions, both ancient and new, from Shakespeare to Stormzy. From tea at 4 to late-night curry on bustling streets. The story of the United Kingdom is one of layers. Celts and Romans, Saxons and Normans, Tudors and Victorians, Empire and Commonwealth, coal and code, crown and parliament, unity and division. It is a land that endures not by standing still, but by weaving change into continuity, by carrying memory into the present. Its history is not finished, nor ever will be. It flows onward, like the Thames through London or the Clyde through Glasgow, carrying past and future together. And so the long story rests, from the mist of ancient groves to the rush of modern cities, from stones raised at dawn to towers of glass lit at night. The voices of Celts and Romans, Saxons and Normans, Tudors and Victorians still whisper beneath the streets and fields, layered in the soil and the air. The United Kingdom is not a single moment, but a tapestry, woven from centuries of struggle and renewal, faith and doubt, memory and change. Now let it drift from your mind, like pages closing in a great, silent library. Imagine the hush of rain on old rooftops, the toll of a distant bell fading into night. The rivers of the land carrying history onward, soft and eternal. You are safe. The story is complete, and the quiet of centuries wraps around you like a blanket. Rest now, as the kingdom itself rests beneath its stars.